Well, folks, I'm back in an apartment at IIT Kanpur and using the camera and headphone like before. This is a nice little essay that won an award. It's a prize essay in ecology and environment from Science, written by young researchers on balancing between evolutionary rescue and extinction, the adaptive potential of reef-building corals in a warming world. I have discussed this topic elsewhere. There are corals which are doing just fine or even thriving in warm waters because of the way they can adapt by getting rid of low temperature symbiont algae and taking on high temperature algae and so on. Let's see what this kid has to say. Evolution has shaped all of Earth's ecosystems. Obviously, they have evolved to deal with natural variabilities, but now we have a warming trend, and if it's too fast, then some species will not survive. But now, as anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions rapidly warm our planet, scientists are questioning whether thermal adaptation can keep pace with the warming, especially in key habitat-forming species, and coral reefs are, of course, suffering from unprecedented declines because of climate change, with marine heat waves triggering mass coral mortality threatening ecological collapse. Tropical coral reefs harbor a quarter of our ocean's biodiversity and support the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Yet the delicate symbiosis between reef-building corals and their photosynthetic microalgae break down under heat stress, triggering loss of symbionts or coral bleaching and ultimately death. Corals have these colors because of the symbiont algae, and they take up CO2, produce O2, and feed themselves, and then support a full recycling system with a lot of biodiversity, all those beautiful fish and so on. Excuse me. As such, novel reef management interventions such as assisted evolution are now being considered to enhance coral adaptation to warming, for instance, through selective breeding or assisted gene flow. So if one coral is doing well in warm waters, then you can try to combine them with ones that are not doing well. So that's kind of the gene flow or selective breeding we're talking about. Theoretical work has suggested that increased thermal tolerance could reduce coral losses this century, but real-world estimates of evolutionary potential have been lacking. Increasing thermal tolerance depends on the rate of warming, so we have to be aware of that. My PhD addressed this gap using a suite of complementary approaches, providing results that directly inform our expectations for the future of reefs under climate change and how we could design novel conservation strategies to enhance adaptive potential. That's the author speaking about his research. The fact that our oceans have been warming for many decades prompted my research question: are reefs already adapting to heat stress? To tackle this question, I looked to Palau in the West Pacific, whose coral reef system experienced major marine heat waves in 1998, 2010, and 2017, but suffered less severe bleaching in each successive event. 97-98 was El Nino, 2010 was a mild El Nino, I think 2009-10, and 2017, of course, was the end of the 2015-16 El Nino. We have to look up whether 17 was continued warming. By simulating historical changes in thermal tolerance and comparing these scenarios to observe bleaching and heat stress, I found that reef level heat tolerance has likely increased by 0.1 degrees C per decade since the 1980s, about half the rate of ocean warming. So they are keeping up, but not as fast as the ocean is warming. This was our first estimate of long-term changes in reef thermal tolerance, giving some hope for their capacity to adapt. But to better understand this capacity, we must disentangle potential underlying mechanisms, including not only the true evolutionary adaptation of coral populations, but also other mechanisms such as shift towards heat-tolerant species, acclimatization by individual corals, or changes in their symbiotic microbial communities that I mentioned before. To address the scope for evolutionary change, I conducted a series of follow-up studies including manipulative field and lab experiments, estimation of marine heat wave projections for Palau under different future climate scenarios, and development of an eco-evolutionary simulation model to explore the power of natural selection in maintaining healthy coral populations over the 21st century. Nice series of works in a PhD thesis, right? For coral heat tolerance to evolve under warming, this trait must vary among individuals and have a heritable genetic basis. To quantify coral heat tolerance for Acropora digitifera, a key Indo-Pacific reef-building species, I have been conducting long-term marine heat wave experiments in Palau with Coral Assist Lab. These experiments are designed to simulate past heat waves through calibration to in situ temperature logger and satellite temperature data. Substantial variations in heat tolerance emerged after testing more than 100 coral colonies from a single population. This variation was comparable to differences previously seen only between distant reefs and different species, translating to the most tolerant genotypes having an additional 10 to 17 years before heat stress becomes intolerable under warming. So there is chronic exposure time period which matters, 10 to 17 years. This variability combined with prior findings of heritability of A. digitifera heat tolerance indicates strong adaptive potential. To determine whether such variability was unique to our study site, we repeated the experiment on 180 colonies from 6 additional reefs across Palau, spanning thermal refugia and hotspot reefs, historically more exposed to heat stress. Refugia is where you have, let's say, warming happening, but some local wind circulation kind of features end up producing a small place where the warming is subdued or not happening. Such refugia are usually found even in around Galapagos, where penguins are surviving or even doing better, and so on. Okay, you can look at other podcasts of mine on refugia. Results showed similarly high within population variability across all reefs, with heat-tolerant corals found thriving even outside hotspots. For conservation strategies such as selective breeding, our findings suggest that searching for variations within single populations may be a better approach than sourcing corals from distant reefs. So if there is genetic variation or adaptation variation within a single population, then the success may be higher by going within the reef. A key concern with heat-tolerant corals is the potential for trade-offs such as reduced growth, so they may survive but not grow as fast. To investigate this, the Coral Assist team tracked around 70 A. digitifera colonies, assessing annual growth by photometry, reproduction by fecundity measures, and heat tolerance. Surprisingly, after compiling these data, I detected no trade-offs, but instead found weak positive associations. In the sense, fragments from faster-growing corals could withstand higher heat stress before bleaching mortality onset. If this pattern is reflected at the genetic level, evolution of coral heat tolerance could come without costs, strengthening the case for natural selection and assisted evolution intervention. So you can go and pick hotspots where heat waves are projected to increase and do these evolutionary interventions. From wolves, evolution produced the vast diversity of dog breeds existing today, from Chihuahuas to Great Danes. But can coral heat tolerance evolve fast enough to keep pace with climate change? To address this, I developed an evolutionary explicit metapopulation model for Palau with the Marine Spatial Ecology Lab incorporating coral demography, larval dispersal, macroalgal competition, and my new insights on A. digitifera evolutionary proteins. After calibrating and validating the model, I ran simulations with differing levels of adaptive potential achieved by varying heat tolerance heritability under contrasting M. Crission's scenarios. You can look up what that is. But for a worst-case scenario of 5 degrees C warming, I found no plausible pathways to coral persistence. Only if global emissions drop to the upper Paris Agreement target, limiting warming to 2 degrees C, could coral populations remain healthy. Of course, we are using 2 degrees C already defined as a threshold here as well. But remember, 2 degrees C is a bit of a made-up random number, so we have to figure out if it's not 5 degrees, where is it? Is it 2 degrees really, or 3 degrees, 4 degrees, etc. In a more likely future scenario of 3 degrees C warming, reefs faced inevitable declines, but crucially, addition of simulated evolution made the difference between local extinction and populations persisting, albeit in depleted states. Although such populations would remain at risk, the continued evolution of heat tolerance under warming could allow for evolutionary rescue beyond the 21st century. Our actions over the coming decades could well set the course for reefs of the future. So another motivation for accelerating mitigation, which is happening but not fast enough for remaining under 2 degrees C. 1.5 degrees C is probably pretty much gone. Coral reefs are among the first ecosystems threatened with collapse as a result of climate change, but my PhD research offers hope. Evidence suggests that corals may already be adapting to warming, with heat wave tolerance being highly amenable to natural selection and assisted evolution. If global warming can be curtailed, this adaptive capacity could help corals persist. Both rapid emissions reductions and strategic coral reef management are essential to maintain conditions where evolution can help corals withstand future heat waves. There is still time, but the window is rapidly closing, so that's the closing line there. Looking at the figure, evolution of Corymbos acropora, heat tolerance through natural selection, several A-digitifera corals in Palau. Adaptive responses to heat wave selection depend on the heritable additive genetic basis of heat tolerance. So here is density and heat tolerance. So reproductive population pre-selection of adults, then heat wave stress comes in, and post-selection adults are now in a narrow range adapted to a higher mean temperature compared to here, but you can see that maybe the reproductive population drops in terms of density and the range of heat tolerance. In C, we see future co-evolutionary trajectories of coral coverage. So you are looking at Paris Agreement emissions and moderate emissions of 3 degrees C. There are several scenarios under shared socioeconomic pathways which give you a range of warmings by 2100 with a certain probability like 67%. That's what we are talking about here. Benthic coverage of Corymbos acropora in percentages. So you are looking at heat tolerance heritability in some measure at 0, 0.3 and 1. So at 0 tolerance, 0.3 tolerance and 1 tolerance. So the coverage percentage increases by 2100, persistence and then regrowth. So moderate emissions of 3 degrees C, that range pretty much collapses to near 0 by 2100. Only high heat tolerance heritability can give some persistence of corals. So heat tolerance in degree C weeks here for the same heat tolerance heritability. Obviously high heritability gives us better hope if we stay under 2 degrees C, but here moderate emissions of 3 degrees C, you can see heat tolerance in degree C weeks has to be much higher for achieving this little benthic coverage of acropora. Okay, this is the worst case in emissions of 5 degrees C. It will collapse by about 2060 or before, no matter what the heat tolerance heritability is, and even the very high heat tolerance is not going to give you any persistence beyond about 2055 or so. So this is heat stress in degree C per weeks. You can see the range here as projected in each case. Here it remains in the lighter colors in degree C weeks, and this is stronger, and here it gets over 40 degrees C weeks in terms of heat stress exposure of the corals. Okay, so I'm reading the whole thing with some comments by myself because it's a nicely written essay. No point trying to cheat the writer on his words, so I read the whole thing. Okay, some people complain that I'm just reading papers. Yes, a lot of times I am, but I'm adding some comment which give it a broader perspective, and there's no harm in reading, right? So anyway, I hope this is useful. See you in the next topic.